All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. We have people coming over from the other sessions, but we are happy to have you here with us. So as you've moved through the day, you've had the opportunity to learn a lot of different things. So quickly, my name is Michelle Webb. I'm based out of Denver. I am the kid in the candy store when it comes to learning. I love to geek out on it. I love to do research and have done research with MIT, Stanford, and some other universities around how we can really help people unlock their learning potential and really adopt that lifelong learning mindset. This is part one of two sessions. So this first one will be really kind of grounding you in the basics, answering some of the questions you have about how our brain learns. And then the second session that will be directly following this is really focused on those brain hacks that you can leverage to accelerate learning for yourself and for others. And yes, definitely any questions you have, pop those into the chat. I'll be watching as we go through, so don't hesitate to ask those as we go. I'll try to watch those. All right, so when we think about learning, we think of it as a very linear process. The reality is learning is a very messy process. We move forward and backward, we move sideways, we go back and revisit stuff if we haven't accessed it in a while. So we really think it's that kind of picture over there on the left. Everything gets kind of filed in nice little spaces, everything's kind of ordered according to where it is. And if you think back to, a fond memory you have or an opportunity where you were really just excited about something, you can bring back a lot of different memories as you think about that. What was it sounding like? What was happening? How did you feel? Was there certain things that were happening around you that you can just remember and bring that feeling back. The reality is, unfortunately, though, those memories get stored in a lot of different places. And so it's more like that image over there on the right of it is images everywhere. There's pieces that we're accessing, and it's really those things that we access the most frequently that are the things that are presented to us as options. So anytime you think about something, pedagogy, well, you might have that be the first time that you ever heard somebody talk about it. It might be a recent discussion that you had. It might be a professor that just drove you absolutely crazy. It could be a debate that you had with somebody. All of these memories will present at the same time. And the ones that's the strongest, the one that has the most emotional ties, the one that you've made the most connections to, is going to be the thing that gets your attention. So our brains are made up of billions of neurons, and these neurons are the ones that talk to each other and give us the ability to recall that information, knowledge, and experiences that we've had. Now I want to take a second just to show you how that actually works in real time. So this is a brain scan that they did. We'll give this a second to load up. So as we go through here, you are seeing in real time what is happening with neurons in the brain. So you can see that little guy up towards the top of the screen. He's bouncing around. He's trying to make new connections. You can see some weak connections happening between things, and then those connections break. But you see those items across the bottom of the screen have a really, really, really strong connection with each other. And this is called neuroplasticity. So that is that ability for you to create essentially a super highway of neurons in your brain that allows you to very, very quickly pull that information forward when you need it. So when we go back to the session that Catherine was doing this morning on self-directed learning, a lot of that was focused on how do we orient and wayfind ourselves? And then when we think about that deep learning that we're doing versus that kind of search activity that we're doing, Googling something, looking really quickly at YouTube, that deep learning is that stuff that, hey, I need to access this on demand, exactly when I need it. I can't sit there and go, hey, wait, I need to give you CPR, but could you hold just a second? I need to go over here and refresh myself on how to do that. So that is that deep learning that we want to have. And we want to have those neural connections like you see there at the bottom of the screen that are really strong and just really popping for us right off the bat. Versus those connections up there at the top that, yeah, they kind of make a connection here and there, but don't really connect very deeply. All right, let's see. There we go. So the model I'm going to talk to you about is called the Prepare model. This is something I came up with research from a number of different sources, things that I've done with different organizations, but really kind of gives a framework for you to work from. First version of this was the pair model, but pair and relating it to learning was a little bit of a stretch, so we went with prepare. A lot of the research you can find in books like Make It Stick. So this book here by Peter C. Brown, Rodinger, and McDaniel. Very good book. Another one is Powerful Teaching. So really goes through the basics of how do you make learning stickier and how do you really help individuals internalize that information much faster so they can access it when they need to. So all of these things from the prepare model that we'll go through here in a sec is really focused on how do you help yourself learn how your brain learns. A lot of the things that we've learned as individuals is how to learn poorly. So you cram for a test, you prepare for a presentation with a client, and you cram information into your head, you review it. You don't really spend that time to think about how much you actually know about the topic or quiz yourself. You really do want to take that opportunity to go through and retrieve that information to make sure that you're building that knowledge over time, because those quick wins, you're actually telling your brain, this is not important. Please feel free to forget this at the next opportunity. And each night our brains do basically a refresh of your brain. So getting rid of all of that neural trash. And as part of that process, if you don't use it, you lose it. So these strategies that we'll go through will really help you from that standpoint. So you saw some of the things. If you joined the first session we did this morning, we asked you 2 questions. And those questions were really to prime your brain from an overall standpoint to think about, why are you here? What is the context of the session that you're going to be in? How is it relevant to you? How are you going to take back what you learned in this session to your day job? It could be simply, hey, I'm curious, I've not heard of this thing before and I want to be here. Other instances, it might be more of, well, I actually am talking about this at work. This is something I actually have to solve for. I really need all the resources that I can get. You might have a different context and relevance than somebody else, but asking yourself those questions when you start can really help make that information stickier. Another strategy is to go really through and think about, okay, so how am I going to apply this when I get back? Relevance, how will I do things differently? So if you see something in here of like, oh, I shouldn't be cramming information the night before I need to use it. Okay, that's a great opportunity for you to change a behavior and start thinking about that. Yes, and Sabita, absolutely. So if you, Jim Quick has a podcast called Quick Brain. He has a book that he came out with. I will say that he does talk about learning styles, which is a myth from an overall perspective. We have preferences, but it's not a true thing of how we learn. So there are some things in there that question a little bit from a myth perspective, but overall the stuff that is in his book Limitless is very, very helpful and are all really good strategies you can use. The one thing that I would call out is, don't think of these strategies as something that you have to invest tons and tons and tons of time on. Most of these strategies are things that you can do in 1 to 3 minutes to really kind of help your brain revisit content, prime your brain for learning and moving forward. So when we think about relevance, we talked about that piece. So as you're thinking about this, why is this relevant to me? Well, we're all trying to be lifelong learners. We're trying not to be the cobbler's children and take that time to do our own self-development. So we have some strategies we went through today that hopefully you're looking at those and going, okay, I'm going to do these things differently. I am going to take that time to learn. I'm going to use, kind of the model and orienting from that standpoint. And then we move into engage. So if you attended the session earlier today with Paul Zach from Immersion, that was really how do you make sure that you are emotionally engaging in what you're learning, that you're taking that time to remove distractions. So, before we joined this session, did I put my phone on mute? Research has shown your phone just being in proximity to you can be distracting. Even people who had their room or their phone removed from them, put in a separate room, still had the distraction of that phone. They physically had to be the one who turned off their phone to know that they were no longer being paid attention to it and kind of moving that piece. With all of us working from home, there's a lot of opportunities for distractions. So, are you putting up little signs on your door of, please leave mom and dad alone, I'm trying to work right now, or I'm trying to focus. Just creating that space because your engagement goes where your intention is. And so if you get distracted by items, that learning process decreases. Practice is a big thing. So a lot of people talked about this morning that, I'm really great at learning things. Actually taking them back to my role and practicing is a little bit of a problem with me. So think about those opportunities that you can take in very short and quick items of how can you practice this? So for example, when you go to your next session, it might be mine, it might be the other one, but prime your brain. Before you click on that join session, ask yourself, what is this? Do I know anything about it? And what am I going to do with the information I learn? So going through and just very quickly asking your questions are going to accelerate, in some cases, as much as 30 to 40%, how much of that information you're likely to retain. But practice is the other side of that coin. You do need to take that time to practice, and you need to practice in ways that vary how you're going through it. So for example, if I practice the same math problem over and over and over again, I will be really, really good at that math problem. But if you give me, this takes me back, but the word problems, the math word problems of two trains are leaving a station, they're going in opposite directions, so on and so forth. This is why I did not major in a math degree. But when you take that context and you shift it from, a simple 2 + 2 problem to something, that's putting that same problem in a different context, that gives you that varied practice that's very helpful. Another way to practice is to interleave. So rather than just sitting there and, trying to really absorb the same topic and just keeping at it, it's very important to change up what you're focused on. And that gives your brain that ability to go, okay, let me think about this. Let me subconsciously process kind of some of this information. And then when you come back to it, you kind of strengthened some of those short-term memories as they're transferring. As we were talking about the resources, definitely check out the work of Britt Andreatta. She has a background in neuroscience. She does Wired to Grow, Wired to Connect, and Wired to Resist are 3 of her books. Very, very good resources of understanding how your brain learns and how you can apply some of the items. So activation. So a lot of people get activation and practice confused with one another. Activation is really that opportunity for you to do low stakes testing with yourself to test, do you know it? So for example, if you have read something and you go back and you start reviewing what you read, your brain tells you, this looks very familiar. I know this thing. And because of that, you are not challenging your brain to do it. But if I ask you tomorrow, hey, you attended day 3 of the conference, what were the top 3 things that you learned? What were the top 3 things from the session with Morgan or the session with Kevin Oakes? If I ask you those things and tell you don't look at your notes, don't do any of that kind of stuff, you're strengthening those neural connections and forcing yourself to think about, what do I remember? Do I remember as much as I think I did? Oh, good, I remembered 2 of the 3 points, but that third one just is not resonating with me. So that shows up for you where you need to make stronger connections to certain information. Maybe it's not as relevant to you as the other 2 items. How can you build that item? And you might find out at the end of the day, yeah, that item is not relevant to me right now. It's interesting information, but I don't actually want to remember it. So it also helps you kind of solidify for yourself what information is important versus what is not. A very good strategy, and this is what I like about kind of that resurgence of peer coaching that is happening a lot, is peer learning is a great way to teach others what you're learning about and putting it within your own context, your relevance. You're making it generative, so translating it into your own words. Peer coaching is a very powerful way to deeply solidify that information because you're going through that activation process. So when we think about reflection, I saw somebody had posted the link on Retrieval Practice. So really in Retrieval Practice, there's a variety of strategies that you can use. One of the easiest is just journal reflection. So, I learned about self-directed learning. What are the 3 stages of the model? What were the things that resonated with me? What questions did I have? Just going through and kind of writing to yourself about what that experience was like can help retrieve those memories and do that from an overall perspective. Journaling is also a great way because as you're going through and doing that, your brain is again presenting a lot of different things for you to select from in your brain. So going back and doing that can actually uncover insights that maybe you hadn't thought of when you were initially going through, does give you that deeper ability to make some of those connections. And then there's strategies that you can use that really just, as you come out at the end of a session, write down the questions that you have from the day. And then use those questions as your starting off point when you're going through and doing your reflections. So effort, this is a kind of a check that you should do throughout the process, because what you're really doing is trying to make sure that you've got that Goldilocks opportunity. You don't want it to be too effortful. You don't want it to be too easy. You want it to be just right from an effort perspective. In some cases, we make learning too easy for our learners. We go, look at me, don't look away. Okay, come this way. Okay, we're going to go from A, we're going to go to B, we're going to go to C. And by doing that, we make it ridiculously easy for our learners, and they're not putting any effort into it. This is why it's so important to do some of those persona and human-centered design activities, because that really gives you that opportunity to understand who are your learners, what is their level of knowledge, and how can we make sure that we're keeping it effortful as they go through? And if we have that mix of participants who are going through, when we're trying to create those craveable learning experiences, how can we leverage those different people in the class to teach others, to challenge with different questions? All of those things can make sure that that effort is there. When things are not effortful, or they feel too much the same, that will be things that causes problems for people.
This is your 5-minute warning, Michelle.
Okay. So what questions do you guys have? We're going to go into the brain hacks here in the next section, but what questions do you have for me?
So I think we figured it out in the chat. I shared the link for that first book that you had mentioned to his website, The Make It Stick. And then there was conversation about what the second one was, but I think they figured that out too. But you can hold it back up again.
So this is Powerful Teaching. This book is by Argawal and Bain. So this takes it from more of a K through 12 standpoint, but has all of the same things If you look at the pedagogy versus andragogy, the strategies are very, very useful across that and does a lot of practical activities. Make It Stick was the first book that I talked through, and that one's by Peter C. Brown, Rodiger, and McDaniel.
Yeah, so now I put both the links for both websites for both books in the chat for those who are curious and wanting to explore more.
And on the practice front, the two books that I would recommend there, well, one's a website, one's a book. The book is Peak by Anders Anderson. And then the second one is research by Bjork and Bjork. They have a website that's all focused around how do you engage in deliberate practice, and how do you make sure that you're engaging in strategies that we're going to effectively pull that information out of your brain and then be able to re-solidify that content.
Very cool. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions because I think some came up and you addressed as you kept going. Sometimes people can chat them directly to you though, and I can't see the choice of air meat. So as a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and use the chat. But I know, Michelle, the link for the research resource. Can we provide the link for the research resource?
Yeah, so if you just search Bjork, it's a father-daughter team. So Bjork and Deliberate Practice, they have a whole body of research out there, some of the things that they do, and they have a lot of resources that you can leverage. So it's Bjork and Bjork, father and daughter team.
Like Tina, but not one of our other presenters. It's spelled the same.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I know we've been hopping aggressively between sessions. I am going to give you guys a few minutes, get a drink of water, stretch your legs. That's also important to the learning process. And then if you're interested, we'll go into brain hacks that you can leverage in the next session.
Awesome. So this has been really interesting. Thanks, Michelle. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Bye.